Hello friends, in this lesson we are going to understand business valuation. So the objective of this course is to make you have crystal clear concepts in financial modeling and valuation. So what about the valuation? What is the basic theme of valuation? What are the key issues that surround valuation? So we'll try to understand in some way. While this will not make you an expert in the field of valuation, but you're going to get a very good holistic idea. So if you look at intrinsic value, as per Warren Buffett, it's an all-important concept that offers the only logical approach to evaluating the relative attractiveness of investments and businesses. So when you look at a business and try to value it, you need to value the intrinsic value, the inherent value. It is basically the discounted value of the cash that can be taken out of a business during its remaining life. So essentially, in all our financial models, we are looking at a free cash flow model. So we prepare a free cash flow to equity or a free cash flow to project model, and using a host of assumptions, and then discount it to the today's value to arrive at what should be the price per share of that company. So if I were to value Google or Apple or Facebook or any company for that matter, all I do is to prepare a discounted cash flow to try to figure out where is the cash generation happening in the company, when is that cash generation happening, and today if I were to discount it, assuming that risk inherent in that business, what will be the present value. So the calculation of intrinsic value though is not so simple. As per our definition suggests, intrinsic value is an estimate rather than a precise figure, and it is additionally an estimate that must be changed if interest rates move or forecast of cash flows are revised. So valuation for that matter is a function of two things: one, your future cash flows in the numerator, and the interest rates that are used for discounting those future cash flows in the denominator. So if either of them change, you got to change your valuation. So two persons, and one interesting thing about valuation is that two people who are looking at the same set of facts, moreover, and this could apply even to Charlie and me, Charlie Munger and him, will almost inevitably come up with slightly different intrinsic value figures, because it's all based on assumptions. So as long as two people have two different set of assumptions, the net present value of those cash flows is going to be different. So you can never ever expect two people to come up with the same valuation of the company. Let's say $100 million. Someone is going to give $100 million, someone is going to give $110 million, and maybe there's some difference in the assumptions, either in the numerator in terms of the future cash flows or in terms of the discounting rates which are used. So price is what you pay and value is what you get. So irrespective of whether you pay a high price or low price, it is value that you get. So sometimes you go out in the market and buy a shirt for, let's say, 10,000 rupees. You come home and tell your mom that, hey, I bought this shirt for 10,000 rupees, and she says, hey, it's not even worth 5,000. So price is what you pay and value is what you get, and value will always be determined by someone who is an expert of that field. So in this case, it was your mom who's been buying clothes for you since your childhood. And see, what happens generally is that in any typical mergers and acquisition transactions, for example, there is a company in the insolvency route and potential bidders have to bid for it and try to figure out what is the likely value of that company. For example, in India, there is this Diwan Housing Finance Limited, which is up for sale because of the promoters not able to manage the company properly, or Jet Airways. Now you have to quote a number to the resolution professional that how much am I willing to pay for Diwan Housing, for Jet Airways, etc. You have to put a fair value to the business, and it is something which is completely based on your financial model. You cannot go to your promoter and say that we can bid $100 million for this company just because I heard that someone else has bid $95 million. The promoter is going to instantly ask you what is the basis of your coming to this $100 million valuation. You cannot say that I just overheard it in the market that someone else has arrived at a number of 95, so I think if we were to win we have to bid 100. Then where is your due diligence in the process? So intrinsic value will be all of these cash flows, cash flow 1 in year 1 divided by 1 plus r to the power n, plus cash flow in year 2 divided by 1 plus r to the power 2, goes on till the year n, and you discount it. That is called your weighted average cost of capital. And apart from that, it is interesting that in valuation you also look at things like at what relative stage of the business cycle is that company that you want to value. Is it like a star where market share is also high and market growth is also high? Is it in a dog category where market growth is low but market share is also low? Is it in a question mark strategy where it has not really been able to perform so high but overall market is doing very well? Or is it is a cash cow where the market is not growing, it has saturated beyond a point? For example, the market for Coca-Cola and the black colas, the market is not going to grow now because of the consciousness over health, the usage of sugar. But then since your market share as Coca-Cola or PepsiCo is high, you can just milk that business. So that is going to factor in your valuation. The SWOT analysis of the business is factored into your valuation. Then Porter's five forces in terms of the bargaining power of customers, the bargaining power of suppliers, how is the threat of new companies entering this business. So entry barriers in terms of moat. So for example, any electricity distribution company, it has got a monopoly in some ways over that city distribution network. So example, Calcutta Electric Supply Corporation. So then that's a moat for that business. So is there a threat of new entrants? No, because the government regulates and kind of gives only one distributor for one city. Are there threat of substitute products? So for example, Procter and Gamble took a huge impairment in its books for Gillette because a lot of people are now trying to put stub. They are not shaving anymore. And then competitive rivalry within the business. How competitive is that business within itself? So these are the Porter's five forces, BCG matrix, SWOT analysis, which along with cash flows gives you the intrinsic value of the business. So our objective through all financial models will be to look at intrinsic value of the business. Value is an economic concept and the likely prices to be concluded by the buyer and seller of a good or service that is available for purchase. So basically you are trying to look at what should be the right price at which Jet Airways is going to be sold to a new buyer. Something like a shirt in the market, that right value. So valuation is the process of determining the economic worth of an asset or a company under certain assumptions and limiting conditions, and it is subject to the data available on the valuation date. So everything is on a given date. So I'll give you an example here. So when Diwan Housing was a AAA rated company, someone would have valued it at very high company as a company which has got a very good robust portfolio of home loans, etc. So on that given date, since those facts about the promoters fraud and siphoning of money, etc., were not out in the public domain, this valuation held good. But then so that was the assumption that the promoter is good, everything is going fine. So look at the share price of Yes Bank. It was 300 rupees on a particular day when Rana Kapoor demitted office. So imagine, so the assumption there was that Mr. Rana Kapoor is going to continue in the CEO's office forever. That was the condition and which this valuation held good. Later you cannot go and tell the valuation guy that, hey, your valuation was not correct, you valued this company at 300 rupees per share. He will say that it was subject to the assumption that Rana Kapoor is going to continue. So every business will have an underlying assumption. So for example, going concern, a business, if it continues, it will earn business, it will earn profits, it will earn revenues, and you can discount the same. If it is saying that, okay, I'm going to shut shop, then you have to value it on the basis of liquidation value, that what are the assets in the business, we have to just sell them off. So valuation will be completely dependent on the assumptions. Price, as we said, is not the same as value. Value will vary with the person, purpose, and time. A diamond, for example, the value of a diamond for me will be worthless, but for my wife it will be completely amazing as a number. The purpose for her is to flaunt, for the purpose for me is to maybe look at value accretion over a period of time. I look at diamond as an investment tool. So is it really worth it? And time, at what point of time, maybe I have become super rich, I am so rich that I now want to show off to my peers in society that I have arrived on the social front. So then the value suddenly changes for me. The transaction concludes at negotiated prices, and valuation is a hybrid of art and science. Now, the reality of valuation is that you really cannot come up with a static number, a precise estimate. Valuation will always be like a range of fair value, that you, when you go to your promoter, the shareholders, and say that okay, we are going to bid for this company, the share price that we should quote is somewhere between $12 to $13 per share. Why are you giving a range here and not an exact figure with certitude, $12.82? Because no one can come up with that kind of a thing, because it can never be a precise estimate. It has always been a number which has inherent biases. There is uncertainty in a given valuation. Even if you put very high quantitative models, it may not necessarily give you better output. So I have dealt with a lot of consultants from all the marquee firms. They make very, very complex models, but eventually the assumptions are what matters, not the jazziness surrounding your financial model. And sometimes it is herd mentality. Everyone wants to have a piece of the cake. So for example, in India, you had this Happiest Minds IPO, which everyone wanted to buy. There was kind of a herd mentality. People even didn't understand the business, but they just wanted to buy that business. Everyone wanted to jump on the bandwagon. So it is kind of, there are perceptions and biases which are reinforced through such herd mentality, which kind of distort valuation. So you might even feel that okay, Happiest Minds at even 1200 rupees is very good as stock. That may not hold good if you were to look at the fundamental reality. So in all stock market bubbles, eventually it is this herd mentality that tends to override the conservative principles of valuation. Now, so if I were to look at valuation and want to do justice, so if I were to teach a course on valuation, you have to simply do one study and figure out what is that one step, what is that one key variable in that business over which its fortunes depend upon. So for example, airlines industry, the only variable is, do people travel a lot these days? So with COVID happening, all the airlines across the world are in a state of limbo because people are not traveling. So what is that key one variable becomes a very important thing. So what are the risks and drivers in a business and the effect on cash flow? So with COVID-19 happening, all the multiplexes suddenly are not doing well because people are very, very reluctant to go to office, uh, to these multiplexes. In fact, in the government is not allowing. In the unlock phase, they will slowly allow people to assemble and visit multiplexes. So the underlying driver of the business is the population, the masses who will go and visit a multiplex to watch a movie. If that does not happen, those screens are of no use whatsoever. So that is this underlying risk. And it's very important that if you do not understand the basic characteristics of the business, you cannot do valuation. Okay, so that's one thing. So everything is about assumptions. You assume, but then you examine your assumptions. So therefore, whenever you make a financial model with respect to your cost assumptions, your revenue assumptions, your growth assumptions, it's always good to have them cross validated with someone else. Because you might have your own set of inherent biases, but then for this financial model and the output valuation to be useful to someone, it is always good that you get it cross validated by industry experts. So get your assumptions validated. So standard of value is the hypothetical conditions under which a business is valued. So it all depends upon what is being valued, what is the purpose. Is it to value a share for the purpose of buyback? Is it to sell the business? Is it to enter into a stock through the secondary market? So for example, I might feel very bullish about Amazon as a stock today. So what is the purpose of my evaluation? It is to decide whether I should enter into Amazon at current valuations. What does the statute say? In some cases, it is going to be determined by the statute. So for example, in India, the Companies Act 2013 prescribes usage of a registered value for any situations where a company issues shares, buyback shares, etc. So, and there are different methods, could be fair market value, could be fair value, intrinsic value, and so forth. So the thesis of value is a premise of value which relates to the assumptions upon which the valuation is based. It could be going concern, that okay, I am operating this business, it's going to continue for posterity. And liquidation means I have shut shop. Now all that matter in this business is these assets. So to give you an example, Tata Steel Jamshedpur, if you were to value it as a going concern, then in your financial model you are going to put, okay, 100 million tons of steel over the next 5 years. For every ton of steel, they earn this many dollars. This will be their capital expenditure. This will be their working capital changes, etc., etc. So it's an operating company which you are valuing. However, if you were to suddenly liquidate this, then you will say that, okay, this is plant and machinery, this is land and building, and if you were to sell it in the market, this is what someone else is going to pay. You are not going to take into consideration that I am going to produce steel and I am going to use iron ore, use coking coal, sell this steel in the market, etc., etc. That happens only when you are valuing a business as a going concern, not as a entity which will be under a state of liquidation. Okay, so valuation across different life cycles will also follow the law of economics. So what happens here is that, let's say you are a startup company and you have come to me as I am an angel investor. How do I, you got negligible profits or turnover, you got no track record, and therefore the valuation methodology will completely depend on the business model. That, okay, you are from IIT, you have this plan that, hey, some people in India can order food over an app, and this is a something which has, let's say, taken off in the US and maybe could take off reasonably well in India also. And therefore you just bet on the model as a startup company, and you will use a very high rate of discounting here because of the risk involved. Fast forward, when the company starts growing and then further growing, you will realize that profits and growths are good now. You got now a proven track record that, okay, X lakh people have already ordered using this app for the food that they want to dine or eat out. And so the valuation method will be business model. Okay, X number of people downloading the app, ordering food, per delivery they are charging this much rupees, and this much they are paying to the delivery man. This are they are going to spend on their advertisement, etc., etc. And I will come up with my valuation. The cost of capital will now be moderated, so as compared to very high, it will now be reasonable. And then once it becomes a mature company, the turnover or profit kind of becomes saturated, right? So for example, we talked about the business of Coca-Cola. So the turnover or profit becomes saturated because now this business is not going to explode in terms of growth. You got a very good track record. You got 100 years of track record for this company. The method of valuation therefore now will be more from the existing assets. Cost of capital again can be high because now it's a mature company. You're not seeing growth, so it's now at this stage where it is now starting to decline. And when it starts declining, you've got a substantial operating history, but the profit or turnover drops. And the method of valuation is entirely from the existing assets because you are not very sure whether the company is now continuing operations, so whether it will earn operations profits, etc. So there is no even point of discounting. You are going to just sell it in the market. So if you see, valuation therefore across business cycle follows the law of economics, starting from startup companies, growing companies, high growth companies, mature companies, and then it declines. And at each stage you got a different basis of track record and history of profits turnover, and therefore your valuation methodology changes from business model to business model with assets, and then more with assets, and then entirely from assets. And the cost of capital from being very high here becomes reasonable, and then again shoots up, and here it's not applicable because you're just assuming that, okay, the company is going to be sold in the market, and whatever the land and building, the intellectual property rights, etc., fetch, you're going to get. So if we look at financial model, essentially we are calculating the enterprise value, the present value of all the discounted cash flows. If you were to discount the free cash flow to the firm at the project level, it will be the value of equity plus the net debt in the company. So that basically means all the intangibles in the business plus the net current assets plus the fixed assets. So that's the value of the business. And in terms of stakeholders, they have the claim on it. So the first claim on the company's assets will be that of the, let's say, the bankers, the lenders, whatever is the net debt, that is the gross debt minus the cash in the business. So once they are paid off, residual whatever remains in the business is owned by the equity guys. So therefore we always use this concept of enterprise value is equal to equity plus the net debt, which is a proxy for the intangibles, the net current assets, and the fixed assets. So valuation approaches therefore will be of different types. One is the income based method, where you can either use the historical earnings and then just capitalize it. So let's say my historical earnings per share is 10 rupees and my cost of capital is 10%. So I can just discount it and say that okay, this company has earned 10 rupees in the last year. That's the earning per share. It gives almost a complete dividend out of it, and therefore I get 10 rupees dividend, and I just capitalize it at 10%, so the stock is like worth 100 rupees. In discounted cash flow, as we looked at in various financial models of ours, we look at that timed and tested method of projecting cash flows over the next 10-15 years, revenues and cost, working capital, capex, uh, debt repayment, interest payment, taxes, etc., and then project the present value of those discounted cash flows in some way. And asset method is the book value or the liquid value method, liquidation value method, or the replacement value method. Relative method is a very interesting thing. So today, if I were to value UTI Asset Management Company, which is recently come up with an IPO, the only thing that I can do is that I can compare it with the listed peers, which is like HDFC AMC or Nippon AMC. So they've got listed peers. If I look at a company in the technology space, so for example Facebook, so then I can compare that with, let's say, a Twitter or a Zynga or an Amazon. In some way they are all technology companies. Or there could be unlisted peers. So for example, if I were to value Ola today, what is the comparable peer for the Ola? It will be Uber. Now Uber is not listed on the stock markets, but there could be some way where I can get a sense of the valuation of Uber, let's say from the draft red herring prospectus which it would have filed in the US stock markets for listing. So whenever I do this market based method where I looked at peers, like in school we always used to think that okay, however you performed, I have got 80 marks in a particular subject, is it good or bad? Doesn't matter. It will all depend on okay, what are the others doing. If all of them have got 90, then your 80 is very bad. If all of them have got 70, 75, then your performance is very reasonable. So it is always like listed peers and unlisted peers. That universe of comparables is very important for you. And then other thing could be like a contingent claim valuation, where you are valuing an option. So for example, telecom companies in India which were recently fighting a case for this adjusted gross revenues. Now what if that liability crystallizes, and therefore that's a contingent claim. And then rule of thumb, very simple for hotel. This could be, we have a separate slide for here, but hotels, one good metric could be that okay, this is a 100-room property in the luxury segment, and hence per room we should value this hotel at 5 crores in terms of INR. So this hotel is worth 5 crores into 100 is equal to 500 crores. It could be on the basis of number of customers. For example, telecom, so this company has got 100 million customers, and therefore this valuation could be, let's say, $2 per customer, or any random number that I'm just thinking of right now. Seats in terms of airlines, how much is the seating capacity of the entire fleet, number of visitors in case of a multiplex, or in terms of an entertainment place, a listed company, let's say like Disney, so number of visitors who visit the theme park. So these are all rule of thumb, and rule of thumb, I tell you, is a very very important method in valuation. So I have always been a great fan of DCF followed by these rule of thumb. Now if you were to look at different valuation methods, each of them has their own strengths and weaknesses. The different methods are used in different situations, and so liquidation method gives a very different method as compared to discounted cash flow, assuming the entity is going to be a going concern. And you get a range of valuation, always helps in sanity check. So while concluding value, all methodologies must be concerned, and then maybe you can apply some professional judgment and look at the facts of the case and look at which of these whole lot of valuations can be considered. So if you look at a steel company, most of your steel companies, let's say, are trading at 14 times their earnings in terms of price to equity. what is the valuation of this particular company. This is wanting to trade at 21 times price to earnings, so 50% more expensive than the market. And sometimes it is justified. So for example, in the Indian context, if you look at HDFC Bank, HDFC AMC, they are almost like 50% more expensive than their peers. Now if you compare them with banks of the public sector, a Canara Bank or a State Bank of India, they trade at less than 1 times price to book, whereas HDFC Bank could trade at 4 times price to book. And there is a reason for that. That is a private bank, completely institutionalized. This is a government bank with a lot of political interference, a lot of bad debts in the system. So these comparable methods really matter a lot. So the key drivers of valuation will be cash flow, where it could be even dividend or distribution or liquidation proceeds. So value of a cash flow stream is a function of when you're going to get this money and what is the risk associated. How do I factor this? So if it is like 3 years from now or 5 years from now, that will make a difference in the valuation. And then how much risk is associated with this cash flow. So for example, if I am a pharmaceutical company and I am preparing a drug molecule, if it goes well, maybe yes, 5 years from now I am going to make maybe $1 billion. But what is the risk associated with that cash flow? It could so happen that there is a 90% probability that this molecule does not see the light at the end of the day. It fails at the trial stage in some way or the other. So then there is a lot of risk associated with this cash flow, right? But if I'm putting money in a government backed security, there is no risk whatsoever associated with that cash flow. It has to come. So accordingly, the cash flow will matter on when and at what risk. Assets could be operating assets, could be non-operating assets, and in valuation we never give credence to a vacant land or investment in the books in terms of they are not going to generate business. The best that you could do is simply sell off. So for example, if it is an Amazon and it holds a 5% stake in, let's say, Facebook, does that stake in any way impact the model of Amazon in terms of day-to-day revenues? No. So then only thing that we can do is probably value that 5% stake at current prices, and there'll be no further additions or deletions to that. Same for some vacant land which this company is using as just idle assets. Just then we have to assume for the purpose of valuation that we'll just sell it off in the market. So the valuation will depend on the purpose, whether it's an M&A investment, whether you're wanting to raise funds, maybe from startups, angel investors, or venture capital or private equity. You wanting to sell the business, or maybe voluntary assessment. Two brothers are having a dispute, so you're just wanting to assess your valuation and then go to the court and get this resolved. So Tata Sons is having a dispute with Cyrus Mistry, and Mistry wants to sell back his entire stake in Tata Sons. Then that valuation will be a dispute resolution driven valuation governed by the company law board, the courts in India. It's like a family settlement. It could be value creation, whether you want to invest in a particular stock and you want to understand whether it's reasonably valued or not. So you need to understand the sector, the relative position of this company in that sector, overall how the sector is going, the past performance, the future forecast, etc., and incorporate that in your financial model and look at the whole thing. So applicability of a particular situation will depend on whose behalf you are doing it, whether on the behalf of the buyer or the seller. So buyer will always want to buy cheap, seller will always want to buy sell at a higher rate. So is it for an acquisition, for company consolidation? So nowadays a lot of companies have cross holdings and they just want to simplify that structure. So you are doing a share swap and merging all the companies. So that is a consolidation exercise. Is it a cross border transaction? In that case, valuation is very, very different. So some investment is coming into India from abroad. So let's say Apple is investing some money in Apple India, or Uber is investing some money in Uber India. So it's a cross-border transaction. So at what valuation is that transaction happening? The authorities will want to know. Is it a distress situation? Is it a boom period? So for example, for edtech stocks in India like Unacademy or Udemy or Byju's, it's a boom period. With COVID, everyone is now at home, maybe trying to learn things online, and therefore all of these edtech stocks have completely shot through the roof in the unlisted space, right? So the choice of valuation will depend on what stage of the business it is, what is the business model, etc. So in case of asset heavy companies, in case of liquidation cases, the asset approach is there. That is as per the Indian laws, and then there are a lot of company specific factors that also need to be considered in terms of the promoter group. If it's a Tata Group company or an HDFC Group company, I have a great faith in the company's integrity, and therefore that will also have a bearing on my valuation, my finance strategies, what is my competitive position. So as we looked at, that entire Porter's five forces, my cost positioning. So am I the lowest cost producer of cement in India? What is my product or service offering? What is my differentiation? Like if I'm Apple, so my differentiation is my sleek design, which completely keeps the user enthralled. And do I have some specific pricing power? For example, in telecom, am I a price taker? Am I a price maker? If I'm a crude oil company, do I have pricing power? Am I that dominant a player in the market? Corporate governance, growth potential, etc. So there are this host of company specific factors that need to be considered. Valuation will always be relative. So if it's a FANG stock, Facebook and Amazon and Apple and then Netflix and Google, all of these technology stocks in some way are going to be compared to each other. Okay, so valuation will always be relative. You can't really compare apples to oranges. It has to be a like to like comparison, but relative valuation is really important. So value of an asset compared to the value assessed by the market for similar assets. So identify comparable assets and obtain market values, convert them into standardized values. So for example, per ton of installed capacity, per installed app. So for example, tech companies, I can just value it hypothetically on the basis of the number of monthly active users that are there. So in terms of a Facebook or a Twitter or a LinkedIn, that becomes a very important metric, that how many users are registered, that is fine, but how many of them log on to my platform on a daily basis or on a monthly basis. And then that becomes an industry metric, because all my advertising revenues is going to depend on whether people are actually logging in my platform or not, and therefore you can then compare. So then you standardize value on the basis of price to earnings or enterprise value to EBITDA. So these are multiples of earning. They could be industry specific variables. It could be price to book value, more used in financial services, banking. Enterprise value to sales. So for example, if it's a startup company, maybe one good rule of thumb is that to look at that company as 10 times its historical sales, because they're not really making money. So you really can't use price to earnings, because there are no earnings whatsoever. They are just growing on the revenue front because they're trying to create a market for their goods or services. So that time, you can just use a revenue multiple or an earnings multiple when it becomes profit able in the market, or then industry specific variables or book value multiples. So it is like audited earnings, trailing 12 months earnings, and easy to apply. EV to EBITDA, best method to apply, considers operational profits, not prone to accounting adjustment. So one good thing about EBITDA is that it does not take depreciation or amortization, something which is prone to a lot of accounting adjustments. And the values are irrespective of debt levels. Book value multiple is the investment that equity shareholders have put in and earned in company, not relevant as much as earnings not factored in. EV to sales, simplest to method when you are looking at a company which is in losses, you are using it to value e-commerce companies or media companies in losses. For example, Netflix is not making money, but you can still value Netflix on the basis of 5 times revenue. So that becomes enterprise value to sales. Now multiples can often be misleading also. So you need to ensure that the firms are comparable in terms of their overall business model, the profitability, borrowings, etc. So the comparables, that selection is an art in the process of valuation. When you look at DCF valuation, DCF is basically the present value of the business. So basically it's a function of its future cash earnings capacity. So here the appraiser looks at the future cash flows. What are my revenues? What are my operating expenses? What are my taxes? How much will I have to invest in capital expenditure, in working capital, etc. And then I use the discounting method to value my equity. Valuing equity using the free cash flow to stockholders requires estimating only free cash flow to equity holders after debt holders have been paid off. So DFCF valuation process is looking at the model, looking at the cycle, looking at past performance. They're very important in terms of, do you have like 3-4 years of history of the company? If yes, that becomes very important. Otherwise, you're just making projections in the air. And let's say you're reviewing the industry and the regulatory trends. Very important for companies in the telecom space or in the airline industry. You're looking at future growth plans. E-commerce companies are completely based on future growth plans, and then you are identifying the surplus assets. We discussed about the land or the investments, and you look at their sale value, and therefore you create a business projections, the profitability statement, bank balance sheets, and then discount them, add the surplus assets, reduce contingent liabilities, and here's your valuation. So your valuation essentially will keep increasing year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, mature at a particular level, and then you like going to take the perpetuity, the terminal value, calculated for the perpetuity period year 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, based on the adjusted last year's cash flows of the asset. So free cash flow, as we have looked at in various financial models of ours, it is EBITDA. From there you reduce the taxes, because taxes are a necessary evil of society. You have to give that as a price you pay for civilization. The change in working capital, and at the end of the project, remember that working capital gets released. Then whatever is the capital expenditure, so in financial modeling you will sometimes take it as like a 2% to sales. Sometimes the management tells that okay, we are going for a massive capital expenditure for increase of capacity, then that phasing of capital expenditure will happen. If you make all of these adjustments to EBITDA, you will get the free cash flow to the firm. So that's an alternative where you are looking at either, here you are looking at the value of the firm, not just the value of the equity. Two different scenarios. When you look at the value of equity, then you will say okay, of my $100 million of capital expenditure, 80% I can finance from the bank. So the bank is so if I make a capital expenditure of $100 million, which is a negative 100 in year 0, I get a plus 80 from the bank, and then that 80 I will have to spread over the next 7 years, repay the principal along with the interest, and that adjusted cash flow will become my free cash flow to the equity. So theoretically, the value conclusion should remain same irrespective of whether it is FCFF or FCFE. And discount rate is a WACC, which is the weighted average cost of capital, which is my cost of debt into the component of debt, and cost of equity into the component of equity. So cost of equity, you can use the CAPM model, which we have always looked at, where it is risk-free rate of return plus beta, which is sensitive to the stock returns. How volatile are my stock returns as compared to the overall market? So for example, for FMCG companies, it is bordering around 1. It is more stable. Otherwise, it could be 2, it could be 0.2, completely unrelated to the market, bellwether stocks. And then this market risk premium, long-term average return of the stock market, plus SCRP, which is the small company risk premium, plus CSRP, which is the company specific risk premium. So there are some corporate governance issues in this company. So maybe I'll have to use a 2% higher cost of capital, and then small company risk premium. So for example, I'm looking at all the listed companies to derive the beta, but they are all like 10,000 crores plus kind of companies. Now this company in question is just like a 500 crore kind of a company, very very small. Therefore obviously the risk is going to be much higher, so there will be the small company risk premium. So if you would have just looked at risk free rate of return plus beta into market risk premium, now you can add two new components: small company risk premium and company specific risk premium. And then the perpetuity formula is simple, the last year's value into 1 plus G divided by WACC minus G. So it is advised to do sanity check by applying relative valuation multiples to the terminal value and looking at scenario analysis. So it is very very important. So what if I am doing a capital expenditure to expand number of my multiplex screens, and what if a black swan event, an unexpected event like a COVID-19 strikes, people stop visiting multiplexes, then where am I placed? Do I completely crash? So we have like a financial model for COVID-19 in terms of populating that entire matrix of cash flows. So the rule of thumb or benchmark indicator is used as a reasonable check. Hospital, it is let's say enterprise value per room, as we discussed. Engineering, your market capitalization will be always like a multiple of your order book. So you look at companies like Larsen and Tubro, etc. They will always look at order book. Okay, it is 50,000 crores of order book. Mutual funds, you would have looked at HDFC AMC or a UTI AMC, etc. The market cap as a percentage of the assets under management. So let's say 5% of the assets under management. And that's a logical thing because all your fee will also be a function of the assets that you manage. So if you were to look at a share transfer agent or a mutual fund transfer agent like CAMS, again it's a function of the overall industry assets under management, because my revenue will also be a percentage of that. In case of oil, it will be the barrel of equivalent oil that I produce. In case of media, how many subscribers do I have? So for example, if I have a YouTube channel, how many subscribers I have, that becomes a very important component of the valuation exercise. In case of power, how many megawatts is my installed capacity? In case of a multiplex, per screen which I have set up across the country. In case of metals, what is my profit per ton in terms of my EBITDA? And then my enterprise value by metric ton of installed capacity. In case of textiles, it could be my capacity utilization per spindle. In case of pharma, bulk drugs, it could be my APIs, my new drug approvals. Airlines, it could be passengers per plane. Shipping, it could be my order book, it could be a number of ships as well. In case of cement, again, like steel, it is enterprise value per ton of capacity and profit per ton. Banks, it could be a function of what are my non-performing assets, NPAs as we call it, debts which have gone bad. Then things like CASA, which is current account, savings account, because current account I get at 0%, savings account I get like 3% interest, becomes a very low cost fund source for me. However, don't just use only rule of thumb. This is a very good thing for benchmarking as a reasonable check, but nothing beyond that. Okay, so for example, in e-commerce, you have this gross merchandise value, which is defined as a total sales value. Now, remember that gross merchandise value is not reflected on the financial statements. So, if I'm a Flipkart or an Amazon, I sell a cell phone worth 10,000 rupees. All I get maybe is an 8% commission on that as a selling platform. So, do I book 10,000 rupees on my books? No, I just book 800 rupees as my platform listing charges. So, the GMV or the sales will then be 8% of that 10,800, and then I will apply a multiple to get the valuation of the entity. Very important thing in terms of startups is that top line is vanity. You can fudge numbers, you can do a lot of cash burn, get more customers, and say that I am going to give you a 10,000 rupees worth cell phone at 7,000 rupees. You're doing cash burn, so top line really does not matter. Bottom line is sanity. To evaluate a business, if you want to avoid the mad rush, look at the bottom line. And then cash flow. Cash flow is the reality. Ultimately, businesses are on the basis of cash flow. So that becomes very important. And tricky issues in valuation, whether it is pre-money or post-money, if the effect of the money coming in the company is taking in projections, then the expanded capital base should be considered. Terminal growth rate becomes very important, that what will I take as into 1 plus G when I look at that G, that growth rate, divided by WACC minus G. What is that growth rate? Because you are assuming that that company will keep on growing till posterity on that growth rate. It cannot be a very high number like 10-15%. It will always be a moderate number. Take the long term estimated GDP of the country or the historical or projected inflation of the country, and then you validate that. This becomes a tricky issue because once you go to your promoter or the stakeholders with your particular valuation, they will say, okay, how does this compare with industry peers? Okay, so otherwise, how do I value a telecom company if that valuation is not in sync with the other players in the industry? And in case of unlisted company, this becomes quite a mathematical exercise. So you take the asset beta and then you unlever it, and then you take a relever. All that calculation is required. How do you calculate risk-free rate of return? I normally take it as like a 10-year government securities bond rate. That becomes a very good thing. And then company specific risk premium or small company risk premium. Small companies are generally more risky than big companies. CAPM model does not take into consideration the size risk or the company specific risk. Shady promoters, business model being very concentrated in the hands of few customers. Look at that risk. while you compute your cost of equity. How lengthy are your projections? The entire business cycle should be captured, not just 2-3 years. Then tax liability has to be worked out. Your surplus assets as well as investments need to be looked out. So then maybe discounts or premiums can be looked at. So for example, my valuation comes at $100 million, but still to acquire that company I am paying $120 million. I am paying a premium. Sometimes I will get this asset at a discount. That discount could be because that company is very diversified. That's a holding company. So if you look at this company called Bombay Burma Trading Company, it's a holding company for Britannia. It trades as a substantial discount to the underlying value of its shares in Britannia. That's something called holding company discount. Very interesting concepts, and you can search about it in great detail. I am a company and I have got a huge tax liability with the government authorities. If I were to lose that case, that whole liability will crystallize. So then if I as a potential buyer look at that case, I will say give me a discount, because I am taking the risk of this liability getting crystallized. So then there could be discount for shareholders level. I am not getting control. I am only getting, like, I am investing in Reliance Jio. I am only getting 2% stake. So do I have any stake or any say in the policies of the company? No. So then I will look at some discount for lack of control. I will look at some discount for lack of marketability. So this kind of negotiations happen. The excess cash and the non-operating assets, we can just look at them and also add that to the discounted cash flows. So the host of methods that we have, this comes here, and hence we come to the end of this discussion. So discounted cash flows for equity for firm, and then you have the control value for equity, enterprise value, comparable transactions method, CTM. You can use various methods like price to earnings, price to book, enterprise value to EBITDA, enterprise value to EBIT. Then comparable companies, you've got price to earnings, book value, etc. And then fair value. So various methods that you could really look at while assessing valuation. So I hope you had a very enriching learning in this particular session, and I look forward to your feedback on the same. Thank you.